Hey everybody, Tim Tobish here, talking a little bit more about Crohn's disease, something I've been dealing with since 2007. To recap, my right eye turned red. I didn't know what was going on, and I was tested for a whole litany of things, from lupus to cancer to Crohn's disease, as I lost about 35 pounds over a month when I wasn't trying to lose weight. I'm really fortunate to be doing well. I don't have any magic tricks that I can share with people who are struggling with it, but I want to help if I can. My case of Crohn's ended up being treated very effectively by acupuncture. I worked with a holistic MD who was a big believer in acupuncture and nutritional work, among other things. I worked with a chiropractor as well. One of the more fascinating things about my case is that several practitioners who never consulted with one another independently diagnosed me as having a chemical toxicity overload. Now, Crohn's specifically is diagnosed by symptoms, if I understand correctly. That is to say, I don't think everyone who has a Crohn's diagnosis necessarily has the exact problem I have, but it's super interesting. Chemical toxicity. What that meant was basically that my body was polluted. I had a game plan that was to purge my system of all the toxins in my body and then rebuild my immune system. This was done primarily through supplements. All right, so that was my approach. I wouldn't be shocked if someone else with the same symptoms as me doesn't necessarily have that toxicity diagnosis. If you're just seeing a Western doctor who's not really thinking in other terms, you might not ever get a diagnosis beyond Crohn's disease. It was really helpful to have something that I could believe was a specific problem and be able to focus on trying to eliminate that problem, as opposed to being told that I just had this condition and I would have to live with it forever. What's really interesting is that at the time I was diagnosed, I was working in a building in a city that was celebrating its 250th anniversary, the city of Pittsburgh, and that building was actually a cathedral built in 1870. That's where my first restaurant was, hence the name Franctuary. We were in the back of this Gothic cathedral. It was built with sandstone, but it was actually totally black in appearance because of all the pollution that had accrued and stuck to the side of the building during Pittsburgh's heyday as a steel-producing city. So 1950s to 1970s, I've seen pictures of Pittsburgh in the afternoon where it looked like it was night out because the sky was so hazy. Essentially, some of that sediment had collected on these blocks. City's 250th anniversary, they decided to clean the building. I'm diagnosed with Crohn's disease. A sexton in the building is also diagnosed with Crohn's disease. A janitor is diagnosed as having diverticulitis, which is another inflammatory gut disease. Another janitor is diagnosed with bacterial stomach infection. Meanwhile, my business partner, who has IBS, it flares up a little. I know this is anecdotal, but super curious, especially in light of the fact that I had 3 different doctors independently that tell me that I had a chemical toxicity overload. So again, the goal was to get those toxic chemicals out of my body, then rebuild my immune system so I could be healthy again. Knock on wood, 12 years later, it's working. It was a solid 6-7 years of working very carefully, monitoring what I ate. I kept a nutrition journal. From there, I've been able to reintroduce my foods into my diet over the years, and I don't have really any restrictions right now. I do take fish oil and a multivitamin. So some things that really worked for me. I mentioned food journaling, super helpful. You're gonna wanna do that if you're having pain. It was really interesting. If I ate gluten, I wouldn't notice immediate pain, but 6 hours later, I would notice pain, roughly speaking. If I hadn't written that down, never would have tracked the pattern, maybe wouldn't have figured out to eliminate gluten from my diet. And of course, it wasn't all just dietary. So one of the things that was most helpful to me was actually acupuncture. Acupuncture can be really mysterious. I didn't really believe in it. In the beginning, I didn't not believe in it. I just didn't know anything about it. And it's a bunch of needles being stuck in your body. It's not really intuitive to the Western mind. In hindsight, I'm really glad I gave it a chance. One of the books that I'd recommend if you're interested in acupuncture is this guy. It's called The Web That Has No Weaver. I'm not gonna lie, it's a little confusing to me, but it still gives me an insight on why acupuncture works, why it can help with inflammatory conditions. Super fascinating, especially if you have had success treating anything via acupuncture. Another piece of the puzzle for me was bacteria, good bacteria, bad bacteria. You might hear some things about it. My nutritionist was a big advocate for raw dairy and the good probiotics that came with it. I took a probiotic by the name of Saccharomyces boulardii for a while, and it was almost like I could feel a war waging in my stomach when I took that supplement in a good way. I imagine the good bacteria is traveling in there, fighting the bad bacteria in my stomach, trying to restore gut balance. When your gut is out of balance from a bacterial standpoint, you're likely going to run into a lot of trouble. Easier said than done to restore that gut balance, but it's something you want to shoot for. Another book I thought that was really cool, it's called Death by Food Pyramid. It's not specifically about Crohn's or solving a problem, but it'll just really make you think about the food system, by someone named Denise Minger. I'm a fan of her blog. She's really insightful. She does good research. She doesn't lock you into the belief that one diet is right for anyone by any means, but she does make you think about the system and its role in your life and health, and how maybe conventional wisdom isn't always right. I think generally speaking, if you have an autoimmune disease like Crohn's that's affecting your gut, if you come to terms with the food you're eating and the diet you're following, great. But a lot of times the uneasiness, the stress that you're feeling can be related to diet, and you've got to work through it. There's no easy way to do it, but you've got to be comfortable with what you're eating ultimately. I've heard people claim relief from Crohn's by following a raw vegan diet, a paleo diet. I don't think necessarily anyone's lying about their experience, but it's very clear that the diet that works for Crohn's patient A isn't necessarily the diet that works for Crohn's patient B. It's also very clear that diet can have a huge impact, and you want to start paying attention to your own body and informing yourself so you can make good decisions. Along those lines with food systems, another classic book I'm a big fan of, Michael Pollan's The Omnivore's Dilemma. It'll make you think a lot about food systems. It'll make you kind of work through where your food comes from. It'll hopefully better equip you to understand your own body and its reaction to foods on a deeper level, even on a spiritual level, if you really get into some of this stuff. Pretty good book. A lot of other books along the same vein that are out there, but this one I think really encompasses what you want for a food systems book. Last but not least, I'm in the restaurant industry. I sell hot dogs for a living. This book, super fascinating. It's a bit of a lighter, funnier read in some ways than others. It's called Horsemen of the Esophagus. It's about competitive eating culture. Back before I had Crohn's, I actually ate 3.5 feet of cheesesteak in a 15-minute competitive eating competition that I was allowed to participate. I was selected to participate in, actually. I lost by about a foot, but I've always been able to eat a lot, and I think I need to keep those instincts in check because I want to take care of myself, right? Especially I'm almost 38 years old now. This book really gets into like what motivates people to eat excessively or even competitively. I think it's a pretty great window into my own personality, other people's personalities perhaps, and again, gets you thinking about food. And I really think thinking about food and changing your mental relationship with food is not a magic bullet, but it can be more helpful than many people acknowledge when it comes to something like Crohn's disease. If you have questions, of course, comment on the bottom. I'd love to see your thoughts. I'd love to interact with you. May you continue to move towards health in your journey. If you're not feeling well, if you are feeling well, I hope you stay that way. And, let's pay attention and listen to our bodies as best we can. And enjoy food, because ultimately, I think food, it's meant to nourish our bodies. It's also meant to be enjoyed, and we shouldn't see it necessarily as something dangerous or to be avoided, but we should instead be in partnership with our food and the animals and plants that produce it for us, and be appreciative of that food. And certainly enjoyment goes hand in hand with appreciation. All right, guys, thanks. I'll talk to you later.